Just imagine, Jesus is there, beginning his journey, and he decides he needs a group of people to accompany him. But no resumes, LinkedIn profiles, letters of recommendation, or job interviews. He simply arrives, looks you in the eye, and says, "Follow me." And that's how the most unusual selection in history began. First, he meets Peter and Andrew, two fisherman brothers. They were there, casting a net into the sea, catching the day's catch. Jesus arrives and says, "Come with me and I'll teach you how to fish, but not fish but people." Peter probably thought, fishing for people? This one's been in the sun too long. But for some reason, they dropped everything and went after him. Then James and John, also brothers, sons of Zebedee, appear. They were in the boat with their father, mending their nets. Jesus calls out, and they both jump in immediately. Imagine their father. "Hey guys, am I going to be left here alone with all these nets?" But they were already far away, following Jesus without looking back. Then comes Matthew, a tax collector. This one was controversial, because tax collectors back then weren't exactly the most beloved type of person. Jesus looks at him, sitting at the little table full of coins, and says, "Follow me." Matthew, who had probably never even been invited to a neighbor's barbecue, is surprised and immediately accepts. And so it goes. There was Thomas, the suspicious one who only believes when he sees, Philip, who ran to tell his friend Nathanael, also called Bartholomew, that he had found the guy, Simon the Zealot, who was more radical in his ideas, Thaddeus and James, son of Alphaeus, who were the least talked about but were firm and strong in the group, and finally, Judas Iscariot, who came in as the team's treasurer. In short, Jesus assembled a diverse team. They weren't the most educated, they weren't rich, they weren't famous. But they were real people, with their mistakes and successes, who embraced the adventure. And so the story begins. 12 ordinary guys, called to a far from ordinary mission. Now that Jesus has gathered the troop, those 12 unlikely friends, their journey begins. And hey, it was quite an adventure. Imagine the group traveling from town to town, without GPS, without a map app, just walking on the road. Jesus always in front, calm, and the apostles behind, sometimes completely oblivious. First, they witness miracles that look like scenes from a movie. There's the wedding day at Cana. Everyone's excited, but the wine runs out. Total despair. Then Jesus turns water into wine. The apostles saw this and must have thought, "Okay, this master isn't just a good conversationalist, he's a good party animal too." Another moment was when a whole crowd was hungry and only had a few loaves of bread and fish. The crowd was already thinking, it's going to be every man for himself, but Jesus multiplied everything and there was food left over. The apostles were like, "We'll never go hungry again traveling with him." But miracles weren't the only thing they lived for. They also had teachings. Jesus told parables, like little stories with profound lessons. The apostles listened and often had that look on their faces, like students who haven't understood anything in class but don't want to ask questions. Only later, in private, would they whisper, "Master, explain again why we got lost in the part about the seed." And of course, there was that epic day when Jesus walked on water. The apostles were in the boat, terrified of the storm, when suddenly they saw someone coming across the waves. At first they thought, it's a ghost. But it was Jesus, completely calm. Peter, who was brave or stubborn, asked to go too. He took a few steps, but began to sink. Jesus pulled him up and said something like, "Hey Peter, you need to trust more, huh?" Besides, their coexistence wasn't all roses. 12 men were together all the time, traveling and eating together. Of course, there were arguments. Who was the biggest? Who got to sit closest to Jesus? Who had more faith? It felt like an ego-filled WhatsApp group. But Jesus always arrived, brought order, and reminded everyone. The important thing here isn't who's in charge, but who serves the most. Ultimately, the journey was an intensive training session, miracles on one side, parables on the other, and much learning. They were being prepared for something much greater, even without realizing it. Until now, it seemed like the apostles were in superhero training, miracles, stories full of wisdom, bread that never ran out. But like any group of ordinary people, they also had their slip-ups. What a group full of ups and downs. Let's look at the highlights. Pedro the impulsive. Peter was that friend who spoke first and thought later. Stubborn through and through. He was the first to say, "Jesus, I will never abandon you." But when the pressure was on, he denied 3 times that he knew the Master. Imagine Peter later thinking, "I said I'd ride the wave, and I ended up slipping with the tide." But Jesus already knew this, and later forgave him, showing that no one is cancelled forever. Thomas, the suspicious. Thomas was the kind of guy who, if you said, "I won the lottery," would ask to see the ticket. While the other apostles were excited, saying, "Jesus is alive, we saw him," he blurted out, "I'll only believe if I touch the marks." In other words, Thomas coined the famous phrase, "Seeing is believing." It's because of him that this expression still exists today. Judas Iscariot, the tangled treasurer. Now, Judas was in charge of the group's coffers, the official treasurer. But unfortunately, he ended up making bad decisions and exchanging Jesus for coins. It was like that friend who trades the whole pizza for a piece of stale bread. A terrible choice. The others also wavered. And it doesn't stop there. One day, Jesus was praying, super focused, and asked the apostles to stay awake. Result? Everyone dozed off. It was like when someone asks, "Help me study, don't fall asleep." And their friend falls asleep in 5 minutes. And then there was the classic argument, who was the most important among them? Imagine the scene, each pulling their own strings, almost like children arguing over their favorite hero. Jesus patiently teaches. On my team, the greatest is the one who knows how to serve. Ultimately, these moments of weakness show that they weren't superhuman. They were normal people, with doubts, stumbles, and missteps. But even so, Jesus believed in them, showing that the journey isn't about being perfect, but about learning, getting up, and moving on. The most defining moment in the journey of Jesus and the apostles had arrived, the final days when everything seemed lost. But in the end, it turned into the greatest turning point in history. The Last Supper. Jesus gathers the 12 for that special dinner, which became known as the Last Supper. Imagine the scene, a large table, bread, wine, everyone chatting. Jesus takes the opportunity to teach profound things about love and humility. But the apostles, of course, find cause for discussion even at this moment. It's as if someone says, "Guys, pay attention to what Jesus is saying." And the others say, "But who will be the most important in the group, huh?" Jesus takes a deep breath and delivers a lesson. Whoever wants to be great must learn to serve. And it was there that he washed the disciples' feet. They were shocked. The Master washing our feet. It was as if the boss of the company had shown up at work and started washing the dishes in the pantry. Fear takes over. Then, Jesus is taken away by the authorities of the time. And then presto, the apostles who had previously been saying "we're together," ran off, each in his own direction. It was like a group of friends promising, "If there's trouble, we're together." But at the first sign of trouble, there was no one left. Impulsive Peter even tried to follow from afar, but when he was recognized, he denied knowing Jesus 3 times. The 3rd time, he heard the rooster crow and thought, "Oh, I told you I wouldn't do that." The apparent end. Jesus was taken to the cross, and the apostles were devastated. The one who performed incredible miracles now seemed defeated. Their hope plummeted. Some were already thinking, will we ever go back to fishing? Because this mission is over. The 3rd day's turnaround. But then comes the epic part. On the 3rd day, Jesus rises. He appears first to some women who run to tell the disciples. And guess what? They didn't believe him. They were like, "You're kidding me, right?" When Jesus truly appears, everyone is speechless. Thomas, of course, still doubts. "I'll only believe if I touch him." And Jesus, patiently, lets him see and touch him. Thomas is so embarrassed he almost wants to hide under the table. From fear to courage. After that, everything changed. Those fearful apostles, who had previously hidden, were now filled with courage. They understood that the story wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. After the resurrection, the apostles were back on track. If before they had been downcast, now it seemed they had taken the courage vitamin. After all, they had seen Jesus alive again. That was no small feat. The final encounter. Jesus gathers the group and gives the famous final briefing. He says, "You will go throughout the world, preaching what I have taught, spreading good news, and caring for people." Imagine the apostles hearing this. Some must have thought, "Wait, Master, the whole world? We barely know the neighboring town." But Jesus knew the mission was no small one. And to top it all off, he promises they won't be alone. The Holy Spirit will come to give them strength, wisdom, and courage. In other words, it would be like gaining a spiritual superpower. Pentecost, the day of animated fire. Shortly thereafter, the famous Pentecost occurred. The apostles were gathered together when suddenly a sound like a rushing mighty wind came, and something like tongues of fire appeared over each of them. Nothing frightening. It was a sign that the promise was being fulfilled. Suddenly, they began speaking in several different languages, understood by people from around the world who were in Jerusalem. The crowd there was confused. "Aren't these men from Galilee? How are they speaking our language?" Some even joked, "Have they had too much to drink?" And Peter, full of courage, stood up and gave a speech so powerful that very day, thousands of people decided to follow Jesus' message. It was the greatest official launch in the history of faith. Field mission. After this, the apostles spread out. Each went to a corner, proclaiming what they had seen and learned. Peter became a sort of primary spokesperson, John became the apostle of love, Philip and others began traveling to distant lands, and thus the message began to reach regions they never dreamed of. And look how incredible, ordinary people, who were once afraid of even speaking in public, were now speaking in front of crowds. It was like seeing that shy friend from school, who barely raised his hand in class, suddenly become a motivational speaker. The basis of the church. This phase marks the birth of what we now call the church. It wasn't a pretty building or a stone cathedral. It was people gathering in homes, breaking bread, singing, praying together, and helping one another. It was a living community, growing day by day. And so the mission of the 12 apostles gained strength. From a group of somewhat clumsy friends, they become courageous leaders, carrying a message that has spanned centuries. After so much walking, stumbling, miracles, confusion, and courage, it's time to see where the apostles ended up. And look, each one followed a different path, like those schoolmates who graduate together, but each goes to a different corner of the world. Pedro, the courageous leader. Peter, who was initially stubborn and somewhat clumsy, became one of the group's most vocal voices. He preached in several cities and became known as the rock on which the church would be built. Whereas before he had sunk in water, now he stood firm as a rock. John, the apostle of love. John lived the longest. While many had already fulfilled their mission and departed, John was there, steadfast and strong, writing letters and the famous Apocalypse, there on the island of Patmos. He was called the beloved disciple, and always reminded people of the importance of love. Basically, John was the one who said, "People, calm down. The most important thing is to love one another." Thomas the traveler. Thomas, the skeptic who only believed when he saw, ended up becoming one of those who went the furthest. He took the message to distant places, like India. Imagine, the man who doubted at first was the one who crossed the world to tell the story. Matthew, the former tax collector. Matthew also made history. He wrote a gospel, detailing Jesus' life. Who would have thought? That man who previously only knew how to handle coins ended up becoming an official writer. The others were not left behind either. Philip, Bartholomew, Thaddeus, James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot also traveled throughout various regions, each leaving their mark. They may not be as celebrated as Peter or John, but without them, the mission would not have gone as far. The result of the mission. In the end, everyone together spread Jesus' message to so many places that Christianity crossed centuries and borders and reached us today. Just think, a group of 12 simple people, without fame, wealth, or internet marketing, achieved something that not even the greatest empires of the time could have imagined. It was supposed to be just a story of fishermen, tax collectors, and ordinary people. But it became a movement that changed the history of the world. The big message. Their legacy is clear. It doesn't matter if you're shy, stubborn, suspicious, clumsy, or forgettable. When you believe in something bigger, you can leave a mark that extends far beyond your lifetime. And so ends the journey of the 12 apostles. A group that began as clumsy friends, but ended as true pillars of a message that spanned generations. It's like the final season of a series we know never ends, because the story continues to this day. So that's today's video. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the next story.